if I go back to my medical analogy, it was a bit like taking a kind of pain relief drug or something. I think it was kind of, there's no two ways about it. I think the registration process is not a pain-free experience. It's challenging, and it's supposed to be, and it is the final hurdle for what for most of us has been at least a 10-year kind of long running race.
Honestly, I could say without a doubt I wouldn't have passed the APE, I don't think, first go without having done PALS. It's interesting, I had about 10 years experience behind me, so I thought I was, you know, pretty well, I thought I was quite ready. It was time for me to register. I'd put it off for a while. But looking back, after having done the PALS, you don't know what you don't know, and there was so much that I learned through PALS looking back that I just didn't have. I mean, you can't always have experience in every aspect of architectural practice. So I think that was one thing that it gave me, was just filling in those gaps in some of my weaker areas or things that I didn't do day to day. And that really prepared me. I felt really confident going in. I was still nervous, but I felt really confident going into the examination process.
I think I was much better prepared for the exam than I would have been if I had tried to do it on my own. I'm not a particularly good scholar in terms of being able to learn things by rote, and the PALS series encourages you to think clearly and to understand the approach of the exam and so forth, and that appealed to me, and I think that's the thing that I particularly got from the PALS series, was that sort of looking very carefully at things like language and being careful to interpret things in black and white rather than the real world sort of shades of grey approach. Yeah.
Especially the opportunity PALS presents to give you face-to-face time with examiners as well, or people who've been examiners in the past, and interviewers too, who are in a position from the other side of the table to be able to tell you what they look for in a potential candidate.
Because it's one thing to study the information and to know it in a sense, but it's another thing to then sit for an exam on that material and to know how the examiners think and what they're looking for.
And I guess the bottom line is it will help you pass the examination process. It'll give you such a thorough preparation, and without a doubt I don't think I would have got through first go without doing PALS, so that alone for me was worth it.
There's a lot of misinformation maybe around about all the requirements of what the scary examination process might be.
I must admit, that whole process was rather mystifying all the way through. But
I think it was very helpful in clarifying. No, this is precisely what you need to put in your logbook, and these are the guidelines that you need to follow, and anything else that says you need to do or you've heard about that says otherwise is actually not relevant. That was very helpful, because the logbook can be a confusing kind of process to go through. It's also gone through revisions in the past 10 years anyway, and so people that you might speak to in your office who say, oh, this is what it was like when I did it, are not necessarily the best informed anyway, so it's good to have that clarified right up front.
If I hadn't had that, if I hadn't been involved in the PALS series, I would have, once again getting back to that lonely sort of feeling, I think I would have felt rather at sea trying to work my way through it.
The value of PALS, as far as I'm concerned, is just a really thorough and well-structured preparation, not only for the examination process, but to practice as an architect.
Certainly in terms of the APE, I'd say very strongly, because I think trying to prepare for that by yourself in isolation would be a dangerous approach if in some ways, because you wouldn't have the benefit of those insights.
If you're considering going it alone, that's probably not the wisest way to do it. I think the kind of, you might look at the cost, or you do these little sort of numbers in your head and you think, oh, is it really worth it? Well, I think you'd have to say, how is it not worth it? how am I going to best prepare myself, and to recognise that I can't answer everything myself.
Getting information that you can't, I mean, even if you have access to Acumen, it's one thing to read the practice notes or to read Acumen. Getting some real life discussion, getting that, having that sharing of information and knowledge that you can't get by yourself, and sometimes you can't get even just in your own practice. For me, the value of PALS was just having people from varying backgrounds, varying experience, information and knowledge sharing, and covering a structure that let us cover all of the aspects of architectural practice.
But also quite inspiring, because there were clearly a few in the group who, were young professionals but aspiring to have their own practice one day. For me, I've always thought that's something that's, a long way off, or be really difficult or unattainable. But I think the registration course and the PALS course in preparation really does empower you to certainly understand what's required in setting up your own practice, what your obligations and entitlements are.
And it fed back into my practice actually, because as I was, perhaps some of the areas that I wasn't so knowledgeable in beforehand, as I was learning those through PALS or picking up bits of information, I was sort of going back to the office and thinking, right, do we have this in place, or sort of, making sure, I guess, advancing our office a little bit as well in terms of bringing it up to speed with current professional practice.
For anyone considering setting up their own practice, it's such a good foundation for doing that.
And I actually went back to the office one night, I think after a tutorial, and started writing an office manual. So it was, we had checklists, but nothing was really particularly well organised. So I went back to the office and wrote the full office manual with checklists and office protocol for all sorts of things that we do. And that, I think that was really important, that risk management and risk minimisation section of the study was great. That actually did feed back into my day-to-day practice.
I think the best and most valuable thing, apart from the little, the kernel of the kind of program, which is the introductory notes, it's the access to Acumen, and just that's a wealth of information. It's only once you start delving into that you really start to learn things. I mean, the courses can only do so much. You have to agree to participate, and I think the real trick is when people and when you could kind of really see when people started learning things was when they'd say, oh, well, I was reading through this Acumen note the other day, and I didn't understand when it got to this particular paragraph, and it said something about this that I didn't quite correlate with something we talked about last week. Can you please explain? And it was those sorts of moments when you started to realise that was the sort of full depth of knowledge that was actually starting to become available and accessible to the participants. That's probably the best reason to do it. Don't be a fool and try and go it alone.